February 2nd, 1977. 2 a.m. The jungle room at Graceland fell silent as Elvis Presley stood at the door, his hand on the knob, watching his band file out into the Memphis night. "I'm sorry, boys," he said quietly. "I need to do this one alone." His musicians exchanged worried glances. In 15 years of recording together, Elvis had never asked them to leave. Producer Felton Jarvis remained in the control booth, watching through the glass as Elvis walked back to the piano, sat down, and put his head in his hands. What Elvis recorded in the next hour, alone except for the tape rolling in the darkness, would become the most emotionally raw performance of his career. But it would cost him everything he had left to give. The session had started 6 hours earlier, with the usual energy and camaraderie that defined Elvis's recording sessions. The Jungle Room, converted into a makeshift studio with its exotic decor and green shag carpeting, was packed with his favorite musicians. James Burton on guitar, Jerry Sheff on bass, Ronnie Tutt on drums, and the Sweet Inspirations providing backup vocals. They'd already laid down 3 solid tracks, and everyone was feeling good. Then Felton Jarvis announced they were going to try the new ballad that Red West had brought in weeks earlier, the one Elvis had been avoiding. The room's energy shifted immediately. Everyone had heard about this song, about how it affected Elvis, how he'd been playing the demo alone late at night, how his girlfriend Ginger had found him crying while listening to it. Elvis nodded slowly and took his position at the microphone. "Let's give it a shot," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. The band counted in, and Elvis started singing. His voice, still powerful despite months of declining health, filled the room with the opening verse about lost love and crushing regret. He made it exactly 43 seconds before his voice cracked completely. He held up his hand, stopping the band. "Sorry, let me try that again." They started over. This time he made it to the chorus before breaking down, turning away from the microphone, his shoulders shaking. Kathy Westmoreland, who had been singing backup for Elvis for years, felt tears spring to her own eyes. She'd never seen him like this. None of them had. This wasn't the confident king of rock and roll they knew. This was a man being torn apart by his own emotions. They tried again, and again, and again. Each take ended the same way. Elvis's voice breaking, tears streaming down his face. Apologies to the band. After the 8th failed attempt, Elvis sat down on the shag carpet, his back against the wall, looking completely defeated. Charlie Hodge, one of his oldest friends, sat down next to him. "Elvis, man, maybe this isn't the right song. Maybe we should—" "No," Elvis interrupted firmly. "I need to sing this. I can't do it with everyone watching." He looked around at his band, these people who had been with him for years, who'd seen him at his best, and were now seeing him at something close to his worst. "I'm sorry. I know this is unprofessional. I know we're wasting studio time. But I need you all to go home. I need to do this alone." The room went silent. Felton's voice crackled over the intercom from the control booth. "Elvis, are you sure? We can take a break. Come back tomorrow." "I'm sure," Elvis said, standing up. Felton, you stay. I need you to run the board. But everyone else, please, I'll make it up to you. I promise. The musicians began packing up their instruments slowly, reluctantly. No one wanted to leave Elvis like this, but they also understood that when he made up his mind about something, there was no changing it. James Burton was the first to approach Elvis, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever you're going through, brother, you're not alone," he said quietly. "We're here for you, always." Elvis nodded, unable to speak. One by one, each musician came over to say goodbye, to offer words of support, to let him know they loved him. Kathy Westmoreland hugged him tightly and whispered, "This song doesn't define you, Elvis. You're so much more than your pain." But that was exactly the problem, Elvis thought. The song did define him. Every lyric about regret, every verse about chances missed and love lost, every word about wishing you could turn back time, it was all true. It was his life distilled into 3 minutes of melody. By 1:45 a.m., the Jungle Room was empty except for Elvis and Felton in the control booth. The exotic decor, the fake fur walls, the tiki gods, the waterfall, suddenly felt oppressive in the silence. Elvis stood in the middle of the room, looking smaller somehow, diminished. "Felton," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space, "don't stop the tape no matter what happens. I don't care if I'm crying. I don't care if my voice cracks. I don't care if it sounds like hell. Just keep it rolling." "Elvis, I really think—" "Please," Elvis interrupted. "This might be the last honest thing I ever do." The weight of those words hung in the air. Felton felt a chill run down his spine. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, Elvis. Whatever you need." Elvis walked to the piano and sat down, his hands hovering over the keys, just as they had 6 hours earlier when this nightmare session began. But something was different now. Without the audience, without the pressure of maintaining his image in front of his band, he could let himself be completely vulnerable. He thought about his mother Gladys, dead nearly 20 years now, the woman who'd loved him unconditionally. He thought about Priscilla, his ex-wife, and how he'd driven her away with his jealousy and his pills and his inability to be the husband she deserved. He thought about Lisa Marie, his daughter, and how she was growing up without him truly present in her life. He thought about every woman he'd hurt, every friend he'd disappointed, every opportunity he'd wasted. And he thought about the boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who'd dreamed of making music that would touch people's hearts, who'd wanted nothing more than to make his mama proud. Where had that boy gone? When had the dream turned into this nightmare of prescription pills, failing health, and crushing loneliness? "I'm ready," Elvis said quietly. "Let's do this." At exactly 2:03 a.m. on February 2nd, 1977, Elvis Presley began to play. His fingers found the opening chords on the piano. Simple, haunting, perfect. And then he started to sing. From the control booth, Felton Jarvis watched in awe and heartbreak as Elvis poured everything he had into the performance. This wasn't the polished, professional Elvis Presley that millions knew from his records and concerts. This was something else entirely, something raw and broken and achingly honest. Elvis's voice wavered on the second line. By the third, tears were streaming down his face, but he didn't stop. He'd promised himself he wouldn't stop. The lyrics spoke of a man looking back on his life, seeing all the moments where he'd chosen wrong, all the people he'd hurt, all the love he'd squandered. Every word felt like a confession. His voice cracked on the chorus, broke completely on the bridge. He was sobbing now, his whole body shaking as he played. But his fingers never left the piano keys, and his voice never stopped singing. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely devastating. Felton had produced hundreds of recording sessions in his career. He'd worked with some of the greatest voices in music history, but he'd never heard anything like this. This wasn't a performance. It was a man's soul being torn apart and laid bare. He found himself crying too, his hand on the mixing board, making sure the levels were right, making sure every sob, every broken note, every moment of raw emotion was captured on tape. Elvis sang the final verse with his eyes closed, tears running down his face and dripping onto the piano keys. The last note hung in the air for a long moment before fading into silence. Then Elvis put his head down on the piano and wept, deep, racking sobs that came from somewhere primal and broken inside him. Felton wanted to say something, wanted to go to his friend and comfort him, but he knew Elvis needed this moment, needed to let it all out. So he sat in the control booth and let the tape roll, capturing every second of Elvis's breakdown. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, Elvis lifted his head. His face was red and swollen, his eyes bloodshot. He looked at Felton through the glass and nodded once. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, Elvis," Felton said quietly. "I got it." "Good." Elvis stood up from the piano slowly, like an old man, like someone who'd just run a marathon. "Play it back. I need to hear it." Felton hesitated. "Elvis, are you sure? Maybe you should play it back, Felton." So Felton rewound the tape and pressed play. Elvis came into the control booth and sat down in the chair next to him. Together, in the dim light of the control room at nearly 2:30 in the morning, they listened to what Elvis had just recorded. Hearing it played back was somehow worse than living through it. The recording was brutal in its honesty. Every crack in Elvis's voice, every sob, every moment where he could barely get the words out. It was imperfect and messy and completely unlike anything Elvis had ever released. Halfway through the playback, Elvis started crying again, but this time the tears were different. They weren't the desperate, anguished tears of the performance. These were quieter, sadder, the tears of a man confronting the truth about himself and his life. When the song ended, there was a long silence. Finally, Felton spoke. "Elvis, I don't even know what to say. It's the most powerful thing I've ever heard. But are you sure you want to release this? The whole world will hear how much pain you're in." Elvis was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tape reels slowly spinning. "You know what the hardest part is, Felton? All these years, I've been pretending. Pretending I'm happy. Pretending I'm okay. Pretending I'm still the king of rock and roll. And maybe some people buy it. Maybe they see the jumpsuit and the sold-out shows and they think everything's fine." He paused, wiping his eyes. "But I'm not fine. I haven't been fine for years. And this song, it's the truth, Felton. It's the only honest thing I've done in a long time. Maybe people need to hear it. Maybe they need to know that I'm not just some icon up on a pedestal. I'm just a man who's made a lot of mistakes and wishes he could fix them." Felton nodded slowly. "It's going to break people's hearts, Elvis." "Good," Elvis said with a sad smile. "Mine's already broken. At least we'll all be in it together." They sat in silence for a few more minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Elvis stood to leave. He looked exhausted, drained, like he'd left part of himself on that tape. At the door, he turned back to Felton. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for staying, for not trying to stop me, for just being here." "Always, Elvis," Felton replied. "Always." Elvis walked out into the early morning Memphis darkness, leaving behind the tape that would become his most haunting performance. The Jungle Room felt different now, like something important and terrible had happened there. In a way, it had. Elvis Presley had recorded his own emotional epitaph, a farewell to the man he'd been, and a confession of all the ways he'd failed to be the man he wanted to be. In the months that followed, before Elvis's death that August, Felton would listen to that recording dozens of times. Each time it affected him the same way. Tears, chills, the overwhelming sense that he'd witnessed something sacred and tragic. He debated whether to include it on Elvis's next album, whether the world was ready to hear their hero so completely broken. In the end, the decision was taken out of his hands. Elvis died before the album could be completed, and the haunting recording from that night sat in the vaults for years. A secret known only to those who'd been there, and those who'd heard the tale whispered in recording studios around Nashville and Memphis. But those who did hear it, music critics, historians, die-hard fans who managed to get their hands on bootleg copies, all said the same thing. It was the most honest, most emotionally raw performance Elvis Presley ever gave. No polish, no performance, no pretense. Just a man alone with a piano at 2 a.m., telling the truth about his pain. 6 months after that lonely recording session, Elvis Presley died at Graceland, leaving behind a legacy of music that changed the world. But for those who knew about what he recorded alone that night at 2 a.m., the tears, the broken voice, the raw honesty, they understood something the rest of the world didn't. Elvis had been trying to tell us all along. He'd been saying goodbye, not with the flash and spectacle of his concerts, but with the quiet truth of a broken man singing alone in the darkness. Have you ever had a moment where you had to face the truth alone? What song makes you cry every time you hear it? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's remember Elvis, not just for his legend, but for his humanity.